أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحابه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today inshallah want to have uh, to talk about something that's really important as well in terms of Quran learning, which is forgetfulness, helping students overcome Quran learning forgetfulness. So for those of you on Instagram, you can join right now. I'm actually connecting my Instagram uh, our Instagram device. So we're talking today about Quran learning forgetfulness, and this is really a common issue that a lot of parents or a lot of students learning the Quran are faced. And everyone will thinking, oh, this Quran is so hard to learn, and this and that. Oh, so what are the solutions? And what is actually the cause of forgetfulness on Quran learning? Of course, when you learn the Quran, you want to ensure that you're learning for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, if it's for kids, for instance, how do you ensure like that is even done? Because the kids in the first place do not even know why they're actually learning the Quran. Okay, a child does not know why they actually learn the Quran unless the teacher actually give them a very detailed explanation of why they actually learn the Quran. So in that regard, you want to help little kids learn the Quran, have a system to learn, a system that will actually help them be able to retain the lessons, be it they are doing hifz or maybe they are actually doing reading fluency, learning how to read the Quran. I used to tell a lot of parents that, or a lot of students, is there are three things which are the biggest challenge when you learn the Quran. One, motivation, right? That's the first challenge, motivation. The second thing, which is the biggest challenge as well, is inconsistency. Okay, when you're learning and you learn today, you skip next 2 weeks. The third challenge, which is the biggest challenge that should be avoided, one is also forgetfulness. So when you start forgetting Quran lessons, you become frustrated. So let's say you're learning how to read fluently, you learn the harakat, the sound, and next week you forget them. This will bring in frustration in the students. So we'll talk today how you can avoid forgetting Quran lessons. Be it you're memorizing the Quran or you're a student or your child is learning how to read the Quran, you need to be able to avoid those three problems. One, avoiding forgetfulness issue. If you're not tackling that as it should be, it will lead to a lot of frustration in the student. When you're not tackling inconsistency, I've talked about that earlier on. If you're also not tackling the motivation part. So today we want to talk about how to avoid forgetfulness. I will start first with why a lot of students have this forgetfulness issue when they learn the Quran and the frustration that will actually come from it. Now we'll talk about the prophetic solution on how to be able to retain Quran lessons so that you're not learning for too long and you're not learning with a lot of frustration. One of the common challenge a lot of students have, which is when they learn the Quran, they only learn in the masjid or they learn online in the class, and that's it. The learning is done there, and there's no any way or any time they come back and practice and revise on their own. Sometimes if it's a little kid, the parents might be want to be the one to revise for them. Well, maybe the parent also is not available to actually help the child or the student revise the Quran learning. And there's no any fast solution to getting to retain lessons aside from revision. And how does the revision work? Okay, so I'll talk mainly in regard to someone who's learning how to read. So if you see a child is learning, they've learned, some people will say, my child has learned all the entire Qaida, all the books of the Qaida, all those books, but still, yeah, they cannot read the Quran after many years of finishing the Qaida. Okay, so there's certain things that need to be put in place for a child, for an adult who is learning the Quran. So forgetting past lessons is real. And if you're not tackling this, there's no way you can be able to achieve any goal in learning the Quran. And I'm saying this not because of my own, vision is about what the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned. He mentioned as well the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. He mentioned that إنما مثل صاحب القرآن كمثل صاحب الإبل المعلقة إن عاهد عليها أمسكها وإن أطلقها ذهبت. Right? This is a very profound hadith that we should hold on today from this discussion. You cannot be learning without revising. They used to also say, من لا يذكر التعليم لا يفاده. So someone who doesn't revise the lesson will not benefit from the lesson. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu mentioned, Rasulullah said, the person who is learning the Quran, who studies the Quran, is like the owner of a camel. Okay? He said, if he tie down the camel, you pay attention to the camel, you tie it down, meaning going after it and making sure it's there. It's still there, right? So the camel is gonna be with them. But if you let it loose, the camel is not being tied down, not being taken care of, not being looked after, then the camel is going to run away. Meaning, whatever you learn in Quran, you need to have a time to revise it. You need to have a time to revise it. You might want to have a goal that, yeah, I want to help my child to be a fluent Quran reciter within this number of years. It's not about the speed. It's about the ability to remember what you've learned. Okay? The speed is countless. People can do it in a year. People can do it. So, but the speed is not the point here, which is the point here is the revision part. Revision part. And so when you see a student learning to read the Quran and they are frustrated with forgetting what they're learning and they are frustrated, they don't want to do it again, this is what happened because they actually not revising enough. And the moment you stop revising what you learn, you will not benefit from that learning, like the common saying right in Arabic. So what we do in our program here to help students learn and be able to get students to revise as they're actually learning is that we have some certain things needs to be done weekly. One, student need to build the skills of talk about what you need to build before, and student need to revise weekly. So in the program here, we make it compulsory. So there's like 4 sessions weekly student will attend. So one of the session weekly is for revision. It's gonna be a one-on-one evaluation for student weekly. So you can learn in group and learn all that, but there will be one session weekly. It's going to be an individual session. Student will be revising and we need to assess what the student is learning. So I'll show you something here that actually depicts the system of what the Rasulullah mentioned in the hadith I mentioned earlier. I'll share my screen here so you all can see this hadith, the beautiful hadith from the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he mentioned, I think you can all see my screen. Let me know if you cannot see it. So this is the hadith I'm referring to. And so he also mentioned about this hadith, and he said is in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. So you can see the exact text of the hadith. This is it. So if you're not sticking to these methods of revising what you learn, and you need to make it consistent. So if you have your child who is learning the Quran for many years and they have this issue of forgetfulness, check on the teacher who's actually teaching them. Are they having a time set aside, be it weekly, be it monthly, to help the student revise what they're learning? Because sometimes the parents or the student also might be the problem. They just want to be moving. They don't want to go back and revise what they've learned. And you end up not learning anything, right? When you going, not coming back and reflect on what you're learning, you end up learning nothing. Okay. So weekly, which is my own recommendation for all students learning the Quran, at least monthly. So let's say you've learned the Fatha, how to pronounce the letters, the sound, and some of the concepts. Go back with yourself or with the teacher and see if you can actually understand and implement all those things back. Or if you're memorizing the Quran, you've memorized a juz or you memorize some surahs in a month, go back and do the revision of all those. You don't rush. Because the moment you start rushing and just after the end of completing everything, then you complete nothing. Okay? So you need to reflect, stop, and go back to what you've learned. So we actually designed a curriculum structure in our program to fit the hadith also I mentioned. So as a student is learning something, so we have like 8 modules, for instance, in our curriculum. So you learn the concept, right? We have the curriculum instruction done, and then there will be a curriculum revision practice in the class, and then there will be a revision. So the student will have a practice to do at home themselves, right? So you will learn in the class, be it in the masjid as you're learning, and then there will be some practice of the concept in that same class. So you learn today, for instance, about qalqala. You've understood the qalqala. So there should be ayat that you will practice before the teacher to implement those concepts. Then you go, then there will be a time which is either you or with your parent or with the teacher again to revise those concepts, because this is the psychology of learning. When you learn something for the first time, it stores in the temporary, we call it working memory. And anything stores in the working memory cannot last long. So the only thing that can help you store it in a permanent memory is to take up that lesson a few days after you've learned it. So that's why in our program here, aside from the student building the skills, within the same week, 2, 3 days after, we have a revision session to go over what they've learned previously. And then the student have a practice on their own, even when the teacher is not there, to actually do the practice on their own. But the good thing about our program is students can record their practice and revision in our learning portal. So the teacher can actually go back to what the student have done and give them feedback. So this is a system that we actually implement in our program. And I think it's really helping a lot of our kids, because when you actually learn something, so you learn, let's say, Fatah, Kesal, Dhamma, how to pronounce them, you learn about the Sukun concept, Qalqala, and all that. You learn about the rules of Shadda, the rules of Med. There's a lot of stuff to learn, right? You cannot just keep learning them, you need to revise. So this is something I encourage everyone to think of. When you learn the Quran, based on the traditional Salam, you mentioned the hadith of Ibn Umar, we need to revise. We need to stick and and tie down what you've learned. Otherwise, it end up being that you don't learn anything. So the simple advice I'll give you based on what I put on the chat here. So anything you learn the first time, you need to practice that before your teacher first, so that you make sure you only understood it, the teacher can give you feedback. And then you need to revise again, maybe with yourself, with someone else, or with the teacher, what you've learned, to make sure you still retain them a few days after. Then you need to have a practice that will be done by yourself. No one is going to be there. So that will ensure that you're actually able to practice the concepts, you're able to remember them and practice those things on your own. So that's the basic way to revise and stay in touch with what you're learning. So I'll recap the structure again. One, you learn whatever you're learning. So be it you're memorizing the Quran, or you learning how to read and learning the tajweed concept you've been taught or you've been read to, make sure you read it back, or you give it back to that teacher right in the class. So let's say you're learning to read and you've learned how to pronounce the Fatha, Kasra, your teacher has taught you. So you need to read examples back to the teacher in the class before you leave. And then you will have to revise a few days after, maybe with your teacher or someone else. Then you will have to record some reading and do some reading on your own. So for students who are memorizing, for instance, the Quran, the good way is your teacher recite to you, they did talqeen to you, or you recite in the class, then you need to recite what they've recited back to you, right? So you've memorized they've recited some surahs or ayat you need to memorize. They've done talqeen, reciting to you, then you need to recite back exactly the way the teacher recite. So that ensures you're actually able to, give back what you've been given, right? Then you need to revise. So you need to revise. As you memorize that, you need to revise it. And then you will have a time yourself to revise and read as if you're reading to someone to get you assessed. Or if it's possible, you can read back to your teacher the hifz. But this is a system that we've actually been using for the past 5 years, and I do honestly recommend everyone. And as you're actually learning, so you see now, then the second concept the student learn, then that concept, which is the student is not building layers of learning, then they need to actually do the same thing. So whatever you learned last week, when you're doing revision this week, you have to combine all you learned last week and all you learned this week. So you don't just, exempt the stuff you learned last week and revise only the stuff you learned this week. So the revision becomes more compiled up as you actually increase your learning. So that's the way I actually revise and be able to kind of stick to the Sunnah of the Salam and be able to revise and retain lessons. There's no any fast and track rule to be able to forget, to be able to remember something you've learned, be it even when you implement this into other kind of learning, be it in school or any other format of learning, is the same system. But the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Quran has its own mu'jiza. Some people, mashallah, they just read it and, but it's not so very common, right? So when you're learning without revising, it's like you're putting water in the leaky bucket, right? That's what it's gonna look like. So when you're learning without revising what you're learning, it's gonna be like as if you're putting water, in a leaky bucket. So you see this analogy I put on the screen, right? So it's like you're putting water in a leaky bucket, right? The water is gonna drain out. It's going to drain out. And the moment you are having that feeling of forgetting things you're learning, you become so frustrated. And this will not last you long in learning the Quran. So revision is crucial. You cannot do without it. It needs to be consistent. Right? It needs to be consistent. Thanks so much everyone for joining me in this session. I hope you've learned one or two things. To recap what I've said so far about how to avoid Quran forgetfulness or learning forgetfulness. So be it you're learning to read the Quran or memorizing the Quran. So you've seen your child learning and they struggle for a lot of time, years, and they're still not getting the results. I've talked about some other concepts in the past, so go watch my previous webinars or discussion. We discussed about the content to learn to become a fluent Quran reciter, the habits to imbibe in to become a fluent Quran reciter, and all the things I've said earlier about is it memorization first or reading fluency first. So today's message is if you want to be a fluent Quran reciter or you want to prosper or you want to excel in any journey of your Quran learning, maybe you are learning to read to become a fluent Quran reciter with tajweed, or you're learning to become an hafiz to memorize the entire Quran, the revision is onto you. You have to keep the revision consistent. If you're not revising, not everyone have a magnet brain, right? Some people do have it, but even a magnet brain also will not last too long before they start forgetting if you're not revising, right? So revision needs to be incorporated into learning. My own recommendation is incorporate revision as part of the weekly learning activities, right? So if the child is having like 4 lessons weekly, have a session to revise. A lot of kids have this challenge because they go to the masjid on site. They have two sessions on the weekend, or some kids even have just 1 session on the weekend. The teachers in the masjid cannot actually design the classes to ensure the days for revision. They can ensure a month, once in a month is for revision, but if they know or if they want to do it. So we need to actually make this as part of our learning system. So you learn what you learn, you repeat back to the teacher, all right? And then you come few days after, not months and weeks, few days after, revise the same thing you've learned, and then you go practice on your own, have someone to evaluate what you've done on your own. Okay? So learn what you learn, or listen to the teacher to read what listen to the teacher to listen to what they will read if you are doing the memorization. But if you're doing reading fluency, let me just be specific on reading fluency for now. If you're doing reading fluency, you need some stuff to learn to build. Once you've learned a concept, make sure you're able to give it back to the classroom right there to the teacher and show that you actually understand it. Then a few days after you've learned, or you need to come back and revise those concepts back, maybe with a parent or with an adult or someone else that knows better than you or that knows those things very well. It might be your teacher again to come back. And then you need to go practice on your own and have some real practice implementing what you've learned. If you keep practicing what you're learning weekly, you see that your level of forgiveness is going to reduce. So if you want to join us in our accelerated Quran reading program where we're helping students to become fluent Quran reciters in our 4-month program, comment below so we can reach out to you to give you more information. Like I mentioned earlier, I've talked about a lot of tajweed concept over the past month, or will I say up to 10 months right now. So I just kind of have a break and have some want to have some very nice conversation with everyone. It's not just about learning. Learning is good, but you need to have, not all the time you learn, right? Sometime you revise, sometime you think of why are you actually learning what you're doing. Okay, so these sessions I've been doing for the past few weeks is a time to reflect on what we are doing here, and to reflect on why we are having challenges learning the Quran. A lot of parents have their kids struggling, but they don't know how to get help. They don't know how to get help. They think probably the child is gonna, get caught up with it whenever they grow older, or they just leave it like that. They're frustrated. They don't know what the solution is. So if your child is unmotivated to learn the Quran, it has a solution. It's not something that's out of control. If your child has been doing it for many years and they're still not getting that result of reading fluency, it has a solution. It's not out of control. If your child is forgetting lessons, it's our solution. It's not out of control. If it's you as well that's having that challenge, it's not out of control. You can get a solution to that. And I think I prefer solutions to all those challenges in our discussions for the past few weeks. I prefer solution to the issue of motivation have to learn in an active winning environment. If your child has been learning and doing that for years, have a consistency of habits to be tracked weekly. And if your child is forgetting lessons as you're talking today, there needs to be a consistent revision schedule. And to be much specific, you need to do it weekly. So whatever you learn, revise weekly. So with that, you can be able to achieve the benefits of your learning and be able to benefit and achieve success in any learning. Quran, mostly you have to achieve success based on hadith or salam I mentioned. I'll read the hadith again earlier now before I leave. Rasulullah mentioned in the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, إنما مثل صاحب القرآن كمثل صاحب الإبل المعلقة. Right? He said the learner of the Quran, the person who learned the Quran is like the owner of a camel, right? So in ahada alayha, So if you tie down the camel and make it firm on the ground, right? Look after the camel, right? Amsakaha. It will be able to own that camel. You'll be able to own the camel. So, and if you let it loose, وَإِنْ أَطْلَقَهَا ذَهَبَتْ. And if you let it loose, it will not be able to own it anymore. The camel is going to go away from him. So for you to be able to own what you learn, you need to be able to tie down what you've learned. Okay? Tie down what you've learned so you're not losing it. If you're not tying down what you learn, you will lose what you learn. Okay? So this is enough for us to learn. And inshallah, we'll be meeting next week again to have another, final discussion about the mindset training of Quran learning. Before, inshallah, September, we'll go back to our Tajweed sessions, which I would love everyone to participate. We'll be talking about, basics and discussing the letters and discussing, the sound and all the things you need to learn to build to become a fluent Quran reciter. Inshallah, I want you all to be here so we can have some practice. Inshallah, bismillah. So I'll be having another session next week. We'll be having a wonderful topic to discuss as well. Before we move to Tajweed sessions, inshallah, bismillah, the first week of September. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.